I don't remember if it's probably from both, but Sayok and Atienne Zakali. But yeah, to paraphrase, there are no victims, only volunteers. And I'll caveat, like, you could be a child and absolutely be a victim. But when you're an adult, like, hey, I went to the gas station, I got robbed. Like, I'm a victim. Were you? Like, you went to the gas station. Like, everything's on the table. You know that can happen. It happens to people all the time. So did you prepare yourself for that with, one, familiarization with, like, violence? Do you carry tools, like all these other things? Or, like, no, did you just volunteer for that situation you put yourself in? And I mean, it's like full ownership with, yeah, what you do and how you carry yourself. Like, no, like outside of a kid, like, no victims, only volunteers. And I mean, I know that'll rub people the wrong way. Like, hey, I was assaulted or this. And it's like, okay, maybe, like, what have you done in your life to prepare yourself for a very real possibility that, like, everyone is aware of?
You're listening to the Art and War podcast with your hosts, Nathan, BR, and Paige. Nathan is a Canadian illustrator with a couple years of military experience. BR is a British anarchist that moved to the States. And Paige is a lifelong artist based in Washington. All three are passionate shooters and community builders. Together, they run the Seaburn Art Page. Enjoy the show.
So you just got back from Finnish Brutality. I just got back from Finnish Brutality. And actually, we just had Luke on a couple days ago. So we got to chat with him a little bit too and just kind of catch up on some of that. Sounds like it was hell for you to get back into the States, though. I'm sorry to hear that.
It was terrible. Probably the worst series of flights I've ever had.
I have had, for whatever reason, the last, probably, Finland being the exception, but for the last probably 8 or 9 flights in a row, because I was like all over the place this year, I had nothing but delays and issues. Like, planes have gotten so much worse after COVID. It sucks so bad.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if you look at airline travel before 9/11, it was awesome. Like, it was part of the vacation. Now it's horrible on all levels.
I had never even been on a plane until I was like 20 years old. Or 19. So I never got to experience the pre 9/11 phenomenon that everybody talks about with planes. Like, airports used to be so nice. There's a museum of flight. I don't know if you've been to the museum of flight on this side, because you're Pacific Northwest side, right? You're out here?
Yeah.
Okay.
North Idaho.
And they have the museum of flight south of us, and they have some old planes in there from the 60s, and like their economy was stellar. Like the shit, the Airbuses and stuff they were making back in the 60s and the 70s trying to improve things had whole like kitchen galleys and awesome cushy leather like chairs. I'm like, this is fucking awesome. Why can't we have this now? Why can't we have nice things?
Yeah, we've regressed. We have.
I recently got the TSA pre-check, and it's like changed my life. They like, I think intentionally suck at their job so that you're forced to pay money to do the thing, but they got me and it works.
Nice. Yeah, I've thought about it, and I don't know. It's so infuriating, like dealing with TSA. It's like, oh, you took the most incompetent people for technically one of the more important jobs, and then you put them all in the same place.
And then
Sweet.
All of them have like maybe one brain cell between them. Like, I don't think I've ever been somewhere where there's like proficient TSA agents. I want to know too, like, I feel like there's got to be like a TSA simulator out there where I can see what it is that they're looking for and be, there's got to be real metrics somewhere for what they've actually prevented. Because everything I've heard has just been like, they don't do shit. And I was like, is that 100%
No, like
true?
there's a lot of stuff gets through, like when they go basically like test and be like, cool, like we're going to go try and get stuff through. I mean, I know a lot of friends who have been like, oh, my bad. Like I accidentally got a gun or ammo through, and obviously weren't going to say anything about it. They just like took it to where they were going. And then we're like, I'm not bringing that back, and like shipped it if it was a gun or something like that. Yeah, no, they're not good at their job.
I can't believe how many people have had like extra, like full mags. Like I knew someone not long ago who was traveling for, I don't know, a course somewhere and accidentally just had a mag that was in one of his jacket pockets and threw it in his carry-on. No one caught it. And it's a fully loaded 30 round mag of 5.56. And
Yep.
he was just like, oh God, I didn't mean to do that. And then he didn't realize it until he got out and like took out his jacket and was just like, I have a fully loaded mag. How did they not catch this? Like, I'm glad they didn't, but still, what the fuck? I'm like, yeah, that's rough, bro.
TSA, tip of the spear.
Well, and then you look at like we were at a literal bomb park in Finland, and I was definitely walking through explosives, and none of my shit popped hot for anything. I mean, they didn't like check it, but I was just surprised. I expected maybe a level of a little bit different screening. Walking out, I was like,
No.
for sure they're gonna catch me in customs. I have to be like, it's okay, it's the bomb guys, you know them, you know. They said that they know you pretty well.
Yeah, no, not fun.
So why don't you just tell us a little bit about you and what it is what Kit Badger is?
Things I do. Well, I guess to create context for what I now do, I ended up spending a bunch of time in the Marine Corps infantry back in like 98 to 02, somewhere in there. Ended up deploying out. We were the first like conventional ground unit over in Afghanistan back at the end of 01. Interesting time to be in the Marine Corps, like going from peacetime to wartime. But after that, got out, messed around, did some junior college, so I didn't have to actually work. Just collected GI Bill and did some off-road racing. Actually raced in the Baja 1000 a couple times.
What?
And then, yeah, it was pretty fun.
What did you race in that?
The best car I could race, which was free. And the first time it was I think it was an 87 Toyota Tercel wagon, 4-wheel drive.
So
and
just tell us a little bit what that means. I'm familiar with it, but just like what is that race?
So basically so they have a bunch of different classes you can race in, at least back in the day. Like my understanding is it's changed a lot now as far as like how it's structured, but there used to be a ton of different classes, like for motorcycles, for example, as far as based on like how many cc's your bike is or whatever. And then there's like a trophy truck class 1, which is like unlimited, like a buggy class and stuff. And they also had like stock VW class, all these different classes. And they also had sportsman truck, which was like run what you brought. And really the only thing that matters was like, hey, will you pass technical inspection, which is really just about safety. Like, hey, do you have a good roll cage actually made of like tubular steel? Hey, do you actually have a fuel cell? Is it properly secured? All just safety stuff really for the tech inspection. And so I'm like, man, I wouldn't mind racing that. And so I got some people together and we basically built this vehicle. Like it was pretty amazing. Yeah, Toyota Tercel wagon, basically cut the whole back off of it, like got rid of the front windshield, ended up with essentially like expanded steel grate like for a windshield. And then somewhere during the course, I'm pretty sure we just ripped that off because it's like, this is terrible. And yeah, it was pretty Mad Max. It was pretty awesome.
So basically just anyone can apply to this.
You used to be able to. My understanding is they basically changed it to where they ended up changing it to where basically the times are because you have to get to these checkpoints, like waypoints, by certain times. Because you're going roughly 1,000 miles, like down Baja, and yeah, so it's a distance. And so you have to basically hit these different checkpoints. And my understanding is it now caters to just a faster race. So I don't even know if they have like stock VW class anymore or any of that other stuff. Yeah, which is kind of a bummer. But yeah, I ended up racing it. And then I'm like, well, I already have a race vehicle. So I raced a couple other races in the SCORE series, the Laughlin Desert Challenge, and then the Henderson Terrible 250. And basically by the end of those, like the vehicle was done, like it was destroyed. But then I'm like, I kind of want to race the Baja 1000 one more time. So made another vehicle this time because the other one was gone. And so made another vehicle. Oh yeah, like Laughlin Desert Challenge. Like part of it is their So quick side story. Laughlin Desert Challenge, part of it is there's a Laughlin Leap, which actually takes place before the race. And it's this huge jump in front of the stadium that vehicles go off to see how far they can clear.
That's so
and so
awesome.
it's part of the race course. So the race course basically goes in front of the huge like grandstand, makes a quick turn, comes back in front of the grandstand where the jump is, and then makes another tight turn, goes out in the desert, does a loop, comes back. And so my cousin, he was driving for me, like co-pilot. And so we're driving through. We, of course, limp ourselves down and over this giant jump because we're like, no, we don't need to break the car like 1 minute into the race. So then we drive out through the desert, and then, of course, it's just getting beat up. I mean, it's a stock TW or a stock Tercel wagon. So it's just getting beat up like in the off-road course. And all of a sudden, like the vehicle dies. And I'm like, man, what the hell happened? And so take the hood off, throw it off to the side of the course. And I look in there, and the battery, this gel cell Optima battery, had fallen in. Like basically the bracket broke loose. It fell into the engine. One of the pulleys cut through the cable and part the way through the gel cell battery. And I'm just
Holy
like, oh man,
shit.
like that's a bummer. And so I'm like, how do we deal with this? And I'm like, okay, I got an idea. And so when we originally were kind of like revamping our Toyota, and by revamp, I mean, I think we changed out the shocks on it and we like changed the oil in it. But the other thing we did do is actually run like a proper ground. And so, but we had left hanging inside the engine compartment is the old body ground. So it's basically it's like just a little braided metal cable that runs to a terminal, and we just left it because we didn't need it. We had put a new ground in there. And so fortunately that was still hanging in there. So I took the battery, threw it back up where it was, took one of the ratchet straps that was securing, one of two ratchet straps securing the fuel cell in the back, ran the ratchet strap basically through the fender and then through the engine compartment and ratcheted the battery down against essentially the side of like the engine compartment, like with this ratchet strap running through the fender well. Put that little tiny braided wire like body ground back on it, and bam, back in business. And so we cruised back around.
MacGyver-ass backwoods shit I've ever heard.
So shade tree mechanic job right there. And so limp this thing back around, and people are still racing around us. And so I remember this vehicle distinctly, this vehicle coming up behind us was like, what? Like such loud exhaust. And I'm not going to go off of like the beaten path because like I don't really want to get stuck out there in the middle of the desert. Like I just want to get back to like the pit. And so this guy goes around us, like barely misses us, hits this huge thing like sagebrush that just explodes as he drives through it and passes us. So eventually we get back around. And so we're coming back around the front of the grandstand, and I'm like, hey man, we're pretty much done with the race. Like, do you want to just hit this jump as hard as we can? And he's like, okay, like sounds good. And I'm like, all right, let's do this thing. So we make that last turn in front of this huge jump and just start going through the gears, manual transmission, what, shifting up, go hit this, and it's like this tabletop jump basically. And so we hit this thing, and they measure it later because they do the Laughlin Leap there. And so from where we left the jump to where we landed, we cleared like 53 feet, like laterally.
Holy shit.
Bounced because we don't have suspension. So bounced all four wheels, then off the ground, and probably bounced one or two more times. And then I'm trying to downshift and decelerate as fast as possible because we're coming in a super tight turn that's already rutted out. Totally going too fast while I'm still trying to downshift and slow down, end up rolling. And so we end up stopping like upside down. Undo, like I'm trying to turn off all the switches, electronic fuel pump, like fuel's just pouring out of the engine. It's out in the desert somewhere, like the hood. So there's no hood. Like fuel's just pouring out of the engine. Like I'm turning all the switches off, undo our H harnesses, like fall onto the roof of the car, climb out. Some guys help us like come over, like EMS is there. We get the vehicle off the track. Needless to say, that ended that race.
Yeah, how are your bodies? Like
Not bad. I mean, yeah, I mean, it probably compressed my spine, like, because that was real, like flying that far in a '87 Toyota Tercel wagon.
with zero fucking suspension.
Oh yeah, and it's like, oh, here's a good idea. Let's put these race seats in it so we can have H harnesses, and they're literally just plastic
Like
bucket
hard
seats.
bucket seats, like
Yeah,
nothing.
100%.
Go kart technology. No, I
Yeah,
jumped my truck on accident. I had my Tacoma and I was out like in the Seattle area. It's really hilly, like San Francisco or something, right? So you'll reach points where you're doing it. And I'm driving out West Seattle and it's nighttime and you can't see. It's a really dark night. It's a little rainy. Like I'm going, thank God I was going just residential speeds. Like if I was going any faster, I don't know what would have happened. But it's like, oh, here's this little lip. And then it just like 90-degree drops off the other side. And you're like, okay. Realistically, it was probably more like a fucking, like maybe like a 60-degree hill. So it wasn't like quite, deep, but they're steep as, they get steep as fuck. Like
yeah,
you fall down those things. So like I just was cruising and I was going at like 25 because everything's like these little 1-lane roundabouts. And the way that the hill went down, another hill went up, and like on the horizon at night, it just kind of looked continuous. So it's just
yes,
like,
you hit it perfect.
oh yeah. So I'm just cruising. All of a sudden, I'm just like, boom. I'm like, oh my God. And then like I hit just, and I'm like, oh my God, fuck is my under like, and I didn't have like crazy shocks on it. It wasn't a 4x4. It was just like an SR5, like, 2-wheel drive,
Yeah,
whatever. But it was like still kind of a heavy truck. And I'm like, oh God. So I like pull over, like get underneath it with my flashlight, like somehow like whatever kadunk happened, the fucking undercarriage was still okay. I had like enough height off the ground that I don't think it hit too hard. I'm like checking my axle, like, okay, no snapped axle, no fluids leaking. Like, praise the Lord, we didn't break anything. But I like that was, you don't have to have much. Like people don't realize how crazy it is driving in a truck, even in like 4-buying at just a 15 miles an hour. Like that can be fast through that shit. So thinking of you going and clearing 53 fucking feet, like the equivalent of like a 4 or 5-story building laterally and hitting that is just like, wow, okay, yeah, that sucks.
yeah. And speaking of how your undercarriage, you're like, oh, everything's good. So when we landed, it totally blew out one of the front CV joints, like just
Just done.
ripped the entire thing out, and actually tore the frame because it's a unibody frame. But yeah, we basically kind of fixed it and welded it up as best we could to race it one more time, which we did. But then, then we moved on to the next vehicle for the next Baja 1000.
Have you ever done the Rambler? I've heard of the Rambler and I've never.
No, it sounds a lot of fun.
You just
Like,
take a shit
it
box
does.
and go as far as you can with it. So like maybe that's kind of what the Baja 1000 like used to be. It sounds like if it's trained,
Probably,
because like I
yeah.
know people who've done that and they're like, oh, it's so fun. They just take a shit box, get it like just so long as it runs. They'll put a fucking toy engine in the thing just to get it to go, and then you just
Yeah,
do your
no, that would
best.
be. I've heard good stuff about it. Like, I think that would be actually a fun race. And who knows? Maybe I'll do that sometime.
Yeah, because you're also not in the desert. Like you go through things, but it's not just being stuck in like high heat, fucked up
Oh,
places.
yeah. Oh, no. Like, I remember passing, like, they were safe. They were just standing off to the side, watching, like, $100,000 race vehicle just, like, burn to the ground, just a giant fireball as they just watched it. Or a guy getting medevaced by a helicopter, like, after he just flew off into, like, a riverbed onto rocks, like, on his quad. Like, yeah, people get wrecked in that thing.
No, they're like I would grow up. I grew up like motorcycle racing and riding bikes and go karts and everything else, and was driving from the time I was probably I don't know. As a kid, I'd sit in my dad's lap and drive the truck. So I was able to like feel like I could drive well by the time I was like 13. So it's like okay, I'm familiar with vehicles, but like jumping and shit, I had some early cautionary tales about that, and it's like if you don't have control, like the first time I think I was like maybe I was probably 5. We were over at one of our parents' friends' house, and they had a really dedicated motorcycle track. One of the guys, I think, used to do some really intense like motocross stuff, and he went off this jump. They had the big jumps, like the huge,
Like where you need to land on the
yes,
other jump.
they're doing
Yes.
exactly, and they're doing like flips and shit, and knack-knacks and Supermans. Like they're doing the whole thing. These are the kinds of guys who show up to your monster truck show. You know what I mean? So they're doing the thing. But one of the guys in the air goes to do a trick, and the bike gets away from him, and he just falls however many feet that was. Like he was way the fuck up there. He had to be a couple stories in the air. Like if anyone's seen those like pro jumps, you know how high they are to like get those that traction, to get the height to do flips and shit. And he ended up falling and just landing on his tailbone and like just breaking the shit out of his tailbone. I was thought I'm like, whoa, so that's what happens. And then, I fucked around a little bit, found out a few times, and then years later we were riding again, and I was probably 10 and or 11, and my dad was on just riding dirt bikes as we were out at the river bar. We're with family and shit, and he jumped. Something happened, and like the handlebar like flipped around, like hit him in the sternum. He went down and was just knocked out. And I remember being like, oh my God, my dad just died. And I'm like 11, like, holy shit. He's going like on the ground, all like gurgling. And I'm like, this is crazy. And then the paramedic, he was fine. They're like, oh, he's alive. I got like an aunt who's freaking out, like, oh my God, he's dead. And he was just like gurgling, like, okay, cool. He's breathing. Like, is he like, how retarded is he now? We're good. Check his files. He comes in, he knew his birthday and stuff, but it knocked him out pretty good. And I'm like, damn, like that was I think that probably saved my life thinking back on it early on, because I have a tendency to be like, yeah, I can do that. And then I go to do it and I'm like, Paige is actually not capable of doing this. And I didn't find out till I was in the air.
Yeah, no, like it's good to learn from other people.
Yeah,
so that you don't have to do it yourself.
If that were only true for most others, like anyone listening, if you're that person who's like, oh, I learned so much from my mistakes, that's why I keep making them. Like, you need to reevaluate some things and look at the people around you.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, sometimes you just got to make the mistake yourself. Like, if you go through, fast forward, I have a YouTube channel, and one of the videos that's actually got the most views that I've ever posted was talking about like being a security contractor, like the pros and cons of it. And almost everyone in there is like, okay, like I understand all the things you just said, but I got this. And you're like, okay, maybe you're going to be the one that's somehow going to beat the odds that everyone else falls into. Like, okay, maybe.
What was the criteria for that? I want more to that story.
No, I mean, it was one of those where I'm like, hey, like security contracting, like big picture, like it's a trap. Like here's all the things to be aware of. Like it changes your relationship with money, because chances are you're largely unskilled other than being able to carry a gun, which is not like a real sought after skill that gets paid for in like polite society. And so, yeah, chances are you never made very much money, and now you're making like 6 figures and you're getting paid, I don't know, $500 or $600, maybe $1,000 depending on the contract, for just waking up like every day. And all of a sudden it changes your relationship. So you're like, oh, cool. Like that only costs, I don't know, like 3 days of work. You're like, no, that's like $1,500. Like that's real. But again, it just changes your relationship with that. Or all the things you convince yourself that like, oh, well, yeah, I have a family, but I'm going to have more time with my family because I'm only gone half the year. And then the other half, I get to be there. And you're like, maybe or not, because life goes on for your family when you're gone. Like you miss that and will never get that back. And especially if you have kids, like it's little things. It's not the, oh, cool, like I budgeted this 2 months to hang out together. It's the, oh my gosh, like I just lost my first tooth, or hey, learn to ride a bike. like all that meaningful stuff you miss because you can't budget for it. And then on top of that too, you're gone. So you are off, gone, doing whatever you're doing overseas. And again, life is going on without you. So then it's really disruptive when you come back because your spouse is like, oh, like I had it figured out without you. And now you're just coming and wrecking my routine that I had. And yeah, like it's really difficult. It's difficult to maintain meaningful relationships like with deploying like that. And it's not super unique to security contracting specifically. I mean, it's same with like oil field workers and stuff like that. Go and work like month on, month off in Alaska or whatever it is. But yeah, people read that, they hear it, and they're just like, oh yeah, you screwed that up, but I got this. You're like, okay, cool story, bro. Like, let me know how it plays out.
You say that about just like when you said the trap, I'm thinking like very physically in some way, like, oh, like it's like things are set up, you're going into danger. But I think what you're saying is so much more, profound than that, and that sometimes you make a bunch of money, but at what cost? And it's like,
that is what it is. It's golden handcuffs. It's like, because then like when I left because I had to reevaluate what was important in my life, namely my boys and being a father. So when I left, totally left without a plan, like no plan. And so I went from making, again, daily rate. I think when I left, it was like $575 or something like that. And then I'm like, well, I have to work. So I started stocking shelves like part-time at a grocery store. Started working part-time at, what was it? Like landscaping. Started driving for like Uber and stuff like that. And I would look at the money I was making for like a 2-week paycheck, like working part-time. I'm just like, oh, or I could have worked for a day and a half. Like there's that. And so, I mean, yeah, like it is a huge trap, but it's one of those where like, hey, what do you actually value? Like if you want money, like you can find jobs that will give you money, but at what cost does that come? Which can be significant.
I think I see that a lot with, I don't think it's just like a modern thing, but especially in, I don't know, what your home life dynamic and stuff was with your spouse, but I see it a lot where men will work, women will pull away from them, because there's an emotional separation. Then men aren't getting, they come home to just all of the things that she's been, festering on with the kids, the frustrations and the routines that she's found. And then it's like, you come home and then the guy ends up being in the way, the enemy, doing nothing right, and then he goes to his job. And this doesn't necessarily just mean like contracting. This is in so many places. Men sometimes will go into their, I guess anybody, men or women, but I see this a lot in a male dynamic. They'll put themselves in a work position because their purpose often identifies with provision, and that's the one place where they have tangible evidence of like success or growth or appreciation, and that's a real bummer too. So as much as it's like, yeah, the father goes away. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say like 100%. Look, so that dynamic right there, in part, like contracting and stuff like that, I think like it amplifies that. But like that is the dynamic that like largely ruins marriages. So for my own part, you end up going and there's separation, as you mentioned. And so people turn to like, okay, well, what can I do? Like, what's in front of me? And so then you have men, largely like myself, being like, okay, cool. Like I'm going here, I'm doing this so I could provide better for our family, blah, blah, blah. Like that is the stance. And then on the other side, it's like the martyrdom, like, well, I'm doing all this for our kids and blah, blah, blah. And the real answer is like, oh, like probably just work on the relationship, like, i.e. marriage, because like all that other stuff largely sorts it out. But yeah, what happens is people move too far in either direction and then just double down on whether it's providing as a man or like, hey, I'm taking care of the kids, like I'm doing all this for them. And yeah, it does not end well. Sample size of one.
I think there's a balance there too, though. Like I think some women want it both ways, which is why you get like, the dependopotamus, they call them things like that, where they come home, they get that guy who goes off and then they cheat on their dude while he's doing the thing because I wasn't emotionally taken care of. And it's like, well, some people have to understand, like, if you have to look at what you're looking for too, like or really assess what it is that you're looking for, because a lot of women will put weight in those things, and well, he has to give me the house and the hair products and the clothes and the handbag and they want all this stuff, but they forget that in order to get the things, it's not just money you're exchanging, it's hours of your life. When I work on something, anyone who works on anything, like I had an existential crisis at 16 when I was working at the shoe store, and I go to buy a fucking pretzel and I sit down, I get this meal, and the meal was like $10 and something cents. And I sat down and I realized this is worth
how much of your life that
than an
cost.
hour of my pay. Like an hour and whatever minutes of my pay at this time, because I was getting like the minimum wage was like $8.25 an hour or something. And I was like, an hour plus of my life went into buying this fucking pretzel and lemonade. Holy shit. And when that like clicked for me, like I kind of got that concept, but in that moment I really understood it and I was like, holy shit. So people will trade these things and forget what that trade is, going back to what you were saying about money at what cost. But I think as much as a man goes and provides, maybe gets stuck in that loop, women oftentimes too want it all. And then they'll sit there and be like, oh, well, you do all that. And the man's like, I'm giving you everything you want. And it's like, what she really wants is just him. And what he really wants is usually just her, or like that family, that dynamic. And sometimes the guy feels like the only way he can do that is if he does slave away to do the thing. And that's just unhealthy.
I agree. 100%.
BR here with a quick word from our newest sponsor of the show that made our first video podcast possible, the great people over at Attorneys for Freedom. Attorneys for Freedom are a real criminal defense law firm offering attorneys on retainer for legal representation in self-defense cases, and are not some insurance company or provider. This means that Attorneys for Freedom are able to cover scenarios that are often denied coverage by other programs. Self-defense scenarios such as while in gun-free zones or sensitive areas, while under the influence or on medication, scenarios where you knew your attacker, and while using any weapon in self-defense, from a firearm to a household object or otherwise. Additionally, Attorneys for Freedom will not drop you from coverage, nor will they ever ask you to pay them back. Even if you take a plea deal where you admit guilt to a criminal act, Attorneys for Freedom will not ask to recoup their fees. Attorneys for Freedom covers 100% of your attorney's fees in the event they can reasonably argue that you were acting in self-defense, and now you're facing serious felony charges. The primary key to coverage is their ability to reasonably argue self-defense in court. Nathan and I have signed up already, and you can too in no time at all. The National Self-Protection Plan is available with a one-time sign-up fee of $100 and just $35 per month after that. Family plans and annual rates are also available. Signing up via the link in the show notes or via the Seaburn Art Instagram bio link helps support the show with both your initial sign-up and every month you retain Attorneys for Freedom services. Get covered in all 50 states, support the show, and have peace of mind that should your worst day come, Attorneys for Freedom has your back. Thanks for listening, people. How's it going, lads and ladies? BR here with a quick word from the longest running sponsor of the Art and War podcast, Advanced Warfighting Solutions. AWS have been making tough as hell gear for decades right here in the US in North Carolina. Nathan, myself, and thousands of others run that gear through the ringer and trust our lives to it, whether that's LARPing in the woods or dragging kit through war zones. AWS manufactures many great packs, pouches, plate carriers, and our personal favorite, the SMU Operator Belt. A set-and-forget gun belt that crushes in build quality, capability, and excellent feedback from its many users. We are tough on our gear here at Art and War, and the SMU takes that treatment in its stride. Though already at a sweet price point, you can knock $10 more off your SMU belt with the code ARTandWar10 at awsin.com. The code and link to the AWS website can be found in the show description. Thanks for listening, now let's get back to the show.
Well, continuing with Kit Badger, I guess. So, side note, ended up doing the off-road racing, decided to go back in the military, ended up in the Air Force, was there for about 4 years, and then got out, messed around in junior college, ended up meeting my wife, or then wife, ended up doing some law enforcement for about a year and a half. And we were married. My oldest son, our first kid, was just being born. And they were looking at laying people, or at least giving everyone pink slips. And I was like, hey, can you basically guarantee me my job? And they're like, no. And right at that time, it had started probably like 2 years prior, my TSSCI clearance came through. And so I had to offer to go contract. So I'm like, let's do this. So I started security contracting. Did that for 6 years. That in part led to said divorce with said wife and reframing what was important in my life, which really boiled down to being a father for my boys, 2 boys that I have. And so when I stepped away from contracting, again, totally without a plan, I was like, hey, if I'm going to be poor, I'm going to be poor doing something I love. So I started Kit Badger, which is basically a website like kitbadger.com, as well as the associated YouTube channel, as well as a couple other platforms where I basically post video reviews largely of outdoor gear, tactical gear. Again, going back to, I promise the story makes sense, going back to basically time spent in the military, law enforcement, things like that, as well as outdoor stuff. And so everything kind of hinges and use that past experience to evaluate different pieces of gear and guns, all that stuff, to include just some adventure videos, sometimes with my boys, things along those lines. But when I ended up starting that, that was really and truly hey, I don't know what it's going to look like here, financially moving forward, but I'm going to want to do something that I actually enjoy, even if it was just really a side hustle at the time. And then moving forward, finally got to the point where it's absolutely more successful. But again, the goal of it the entire time was to have time. There's probably a bunch of money on the table because ultimately I could go work more. But at the end of the month when I'm like, oh, cool, rent's paid, cool, let's go play. And since I have my boys 50-50, week on, week off, that turns into me just getting to go do all the important things that I want to do versus, again, chasing money, which is not a motivating factor for me. I mean, everyone needs money because that's real.
You can not care about money, but the electrical bill doesn't care if you don't care about money. It's coming.
This is true. But no, being able to basically balance that, though, to where it's hey, what do I value? And investing to where you get the things that you value, to where, cool, I have the time to go do the things I want, and the things I enjoy largely dovetail, fortunately, with work. So, I get to take my boys, go down to shooting competition and have my oldest son run around and film me for some of the stages or whatever. And yeah, good times.
No, I think that's really critical. I think some people get caught up in it and forget that it's they can find that balance, or they feel that it's impossible. You say you did contracting for 6 years. I don't know anyone. I know a lot of contractors. I've got plenty in my family. And it's as far as those go, I don't know anyone who's done it less than 5 years. And many of them are
Right.
married men, or have had a lot of fiancés that didn't work out, or, divorces, whatever. And I recognize, though, too, that, I don't know, I guess I don't feel too harshly about those people or think that they're irresponsible, because I get why people do it. I've never been in a position where, I've never fucking served. I've never done anything, important in that way. I've had the exceptional privilege of getting to go to some very real, courses and experiences. And even when I'm in that and you're there for a week and all you're doing is waking up, planning violence, committing violence, going back to sleep, and that's your routine, nothing else matters and everything makes fucking sense. Every time I come home from that, I'm just what do I do with my life? Like, not like it's the only time I ever felt like I've had a real vacation, as counterintuitive as that sounds, is when I go do something like that. When I'm away and like that's all I'm focused on. It's not someone necessarily telling me what to do and how to live, but you just go there and then you focus on one thing and you're sitting there just like adrenaline min-maxing the whole time and stress inoculation and working together with people. Everything just clicks. And then I left that the first time I'd done something like that going, I think the tiniest bit I understand, not just know, but understand why people keep going back to that. It's like the end of the Hurt Locker, or the guy comes home to his kid and his wife and leaves and is just like, oh, gotta go do it again. People are like, what the fuck? How can you do that? And the people who've been in it are like, no, I get that. And I do understand that. And anyone who hasn't experienced that, who hasn't experienced being in a position where you're utilizing all of your like physical lizard brain adrenaline and skills and honing those things to eliminate a threat or work towards that, there's nothing else like it.
I think that in part what that speaks to too is just like purpose or lack of purpose in daily life, where, hey, if there's some sort of mission to where you're mission oriented, like, and if you actually believe in the mission, then yeah, like you have purpose and you're like, oh, cool. Like this makes sense. Like, let's go do the thing. But a lot of people don't have a mission or honestly much of a purpose. And as a quick aside, when I talk about, hey, things I enjoy, like what motivates me in my life is largely having experiences, like to include Finnish brutality. Like, yeah. I was super stoked on the experience, like not a outcome, just the experience. And when I say caveat, like some people really want to see a decimal point move in a bank account, and like that's them, like that's their motive. And if that's you, like that's cool. Like just, I don't know, recognize that will probably come with a cost with respect to interpersonal relationships and stuff like that.
Just a little.
I mean, it can, but yeah, to each their own.
You mentioned purpose, and I feel like that's a really important thing. And I'd argue that there's a bit of a purpose crisis, especially among young men. Like there's a reason we read Lord of the Rings or read these stories or the Odyssey and you even biblical stories and look at that and connect with that, the greater good, whatever that means, or the
hero's journey.
Yeah, exactly, the hero's journey. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. And like with that, people are so placated and content to a point of, or even I guess if they're discontent, they refuse to move from their pool of stagnation. And it's really sad because I think there's a lot of young men who right now, even just getting their ass up, making their fucking bed and going to lift weights, like that's in and of itself, it's a simple thing. Simple doesn't mean easy, but it's a simple thing, right? Could vastly improve their lives and help them work towards something. And so many people right now, and I say specifically men, right, as we've like destroyed the nuclear family, as we've destroyed, for what it's worth, most men, I'm sure, even listening, knows what it's like to feel invisible, to cling to a compliment because no one's told you that you look nice and forever long. The thing that women complain about when they hit their wall, men experience sometimes their whole fucking life, right? Where they're like, all of a sudden no one's looking at me and I'm not getting compliments anymore. And it's like, yeah, welcome to what a man experiences his whole life because he feels expendable. And it's just, I don't know, it's sad to see. And I don't know, what advice as a real father, as someone who's experienced, do you think that like you can give to someone for finding purpose?
Oof, man, that's a big one, a tall ask. Yeah, I mean, people find it a lot of different places. And I mean, you have things like the military, which does it for you. and things like that. No, I mean, you do. And I mean, it's formulaic on a certain sense. Like, how do you end up like, well, I guess bonding, I guess, is relatively like formulaic and stuff. Maybe not finding purpose, but like the ability to bond like with other men through like hardship and shared experiences and things along those lines. But like on the purpose side, man, that's a tough one. So I guess I will share a kind of related story that might roundabout answer that. I kind of, after I'd already started Kit Badger, I was following, and I can't for the life of me remember who it was, but he basically, there was a video talking about like, hey, like kind of finding your passion. And with that, the way it was described is go through and make, and I've actually shared this with some friends who were kind of like stuck, like, hey, like what should I be doing? It's like, okay, we'll go on a big whiteboard or something like that, big sheet of paper, whatever it is. Basically write down all the things that you actually enjoy doing, like the things you enjoy doing. And then also go through and write down all the things that you're actually good at, which doesn't mean you have to enjoy doing them, but things you are actually good at. And then lastly, basically fill this other space with all the things you would like to do, or at least think you would like to do, because sometimes when you do things, you find out you don't really want to do them.
Yeah.
But with all of those things thrown out there, ultimately work on creating a big Venn diagram. And so where do most of those things ultimately end up overlapping? And that is probably a good place to start. Like for my own part, I love spending time out in the mountains. Like I also really enjoy shooting, like on the range and stuff like that. And I like, there's absolutely a creative, like artistic side of me. So like I enjoy like, drawing, writing, photography, like all this different stuff, to include editing, filming. And so for me, like with respect to Kit Badger, like everything it is, like largely that is like squarely in the middle of this big Venn diagram of all the things I want to do, am good at, and enjoy doing. Like it's right there in the middle. And I mean that, now how do you kind of divine a purpose out of that? Like, I don't know, like specifically for me with respect to Kit Badger, like there's kind of three pillars that it stands on, I guess, as with respect to the content I create. Like one, ideally trying to be educational, like help people make informed decisions on whether something works or doesn't work in the context of how they're going to use it. And then also hopefully entertaining on some level, as far as even if it's just cool backdrops. Like I film everything largely up in the mountains or just cool places, not in a basement. And then lastly, to hopefully inspire, whether it's ideally get people out into the mountains or just doing more things like physically, spending more time on the range, or even a lot of the feedback I get that's really positive is just, especially when I include my boys in my videos and just like get to interact and on a certain level just kind of model like largely a pretty positive, like, yeah, in a pretty positive way too. Like my boys are awesome. Like I love them. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question at all.
No, I funny enough, there's something called Ikigai. It's the Japanese Venn diagram of purpose. And what you explained is effectively your organic coming to that diagram. Ikigai is spelled like Ikigai. Anyone listening, you should just take a moment to look it up. It's a really cool picture that just shows like vocation, career, purpose, and it's that. It's like, here's the thing that makes money. Here's what you enjoy doing. Here's what this is. Here's the thing that you're good at and it makes money. That's what this is. Here's whatever. And it's just it just sounds like a more succinctly organized version of what you're talking about. And I think that's a great start, and it's an easy, well, not easy for people, but a simple way to address things, to look at that and to have a moment of what am I good at? What makes, what makes meaningful moves in my life? Do I care about doing something meaningful, or am I just trying to survive? Like for me personally, I have my three elements of my own business, which is how much do I like it? How much time does it take? And how much money does it make? Those are the three perfect, like, if I can get that overlap and the sweet spot someday, that'd be awesome. But that's a lot of discovery. Like you mentioned, trying things out that, oh, you try that. You don't know if you're going to like it again. There's a point, as I like to say it, I think the adult turning point is knowing the difference between could and should. And that's with maturity. Like, oh, I could take on another 150 commissions. Should I? No. So it's like coming down to, I can have this shit food every night if I want. Should I? No. As you're sitting there eating crappy food because you're 18 living on your own. You're like, oh yeah, I can do whatever the fuck I want now. There's no mom and dad to tell me what to do. And then you're like, oh no, my parents were right. And you're sitting there all just like sick off shit food with no vitamins and full of American sugar. And you're like, oh, why have I done this to myself?
No, absolutely. And I mean, yeah. The other part to that, when people are kind of reflecting and looking at like, hey, like, what do I want to be doing? And things along those lines. Well, two things. First, I will mention, be real, like as real as you can be with yourself, and ask yourself, do I want to do this, or do I want to have done that? Because I'll do a lot of things that people will want to have done, but they do not want to go do the thing that I'm doing. Like, there's things that are difficult and uncomfortable, like to get to places or to do things. Like, yeah, like there's usually a lot of work involved. So do you actually want to do that work and ultimately go on the journey of doing that thing? Or do you want to just have done it? Like, do you want to climb a mountain, or do you want to have climbed a mountain? Do you like the idea of having climbed a mountain, or do you want to actually go climb the damn mountain? Like,
that's a really good way of putting it.
Those are wildly different experiences. As far as like, do you want to be in a place where you can reflect back on like, oh, I climbed a mountain, or do you want to actually climb the damn mountain? Like, because those are not the same. And there's a lot of people that like the idea of something without actually really wanting to go do it. Because if you're trying to find the destination, like, good luck with that. Versus if you commit to the journey of wherever it is. Like with Kit Badger, if I was like, man, I want to make a YouTube channel so I can make money, sweet. Yeah, that would have failed a long time ago. Versus, hey man, like, I'm going to make Kit Badger. It's going to be something I enjoy doing, which is going to keep me doing it. And eventually it's going to make money because in 10 years, I'm going to be an overnight success. And being real about the timeline, like, cool. Like, I'm on track 7 years into my 10-year timeline of being an overnight success. Like, we'll get there. But no, like, it's a journey, and you better be in for the journey. Otherwise, you're probably going to be disappointed if you're just looking for an outcome.
That's such a valid point in the way that, like, even the having said, oh, I did that thing. It's the notch on the belt. It's you fucked that chick. You went to that place. You did whatever. But in that moment, there's a lot of disassociation from that. But like, I think about that too, where there's some survival stuff I hope to take here pretty soon, and it sounds like hell. It sounds like absolute fucking hell. And the reason I want to do it, like, isn't just to say like, oh, I did it. It's to be like, no, I'm better for it. And that's something where I really like collect. I like to say that I collect experiences. I like to collect experiences.
Yeah.
But it's not for the sake of accolade. It has to give me something that enriches my life in a way that helps me remain prepared and accountable, if that makes sense. Like,
no, for sure. Like every time I go out in the mountains and every time I go light a fire, like with a ferro rod or something like that, like, cool, another rep. Yeah. Like, yeah, I got a lighter in my pocket, but I'll go out of my way because it's like, all right, cool. Like, I'm going to continue to work towards mastering a craft, whatever it is, like time on the range, all that stuff. And it's about that continual journey with that rather than just being there. And I think that is often kind of lost on people.
You know, and I think there's on that note, like there's an understanding that needs to be that going back to purpose and stuff, I think there needs to be an understanding of accountability. People are so, it's like they're allergic to accountability, especially fucking women, right? Their differential violence and everything else. They're just like, I didn't, yeah, whatever. It was just, I'm oppressed. And it's like, no, there's a level of, like, even people who have mental illnesses, right? Like, we've all struggled. If you're anyone who's lived in any real way, you've struggled somehow. And many of us have physical and or, mental things that have been really disparaging in our life. But like, someone said to me just the other day, or was in my Discord, someone had said that mental illness isn't your fault, but it is your responsibility. So people will make handicaps for themselves, and it's like in that point of, oh, well, they want to just do the thing to get the thing done, and they're not looking at what that means in its totality. That takes a level of understanding. It's like people who want to get fit, and I've talked about this before. They go like, oh, I'm going to work out and get the bikini body, and then the bikini body's there, and it's like, no, our goals are organic. Our goals aren't like our accolades will forever be there, but our goals are organic. They change with us. They grow with us. I just turned 31. Like, my body already doesn't recover how it used to 6 years ago because scientifically it's impossible. I do things to circumvent that, but how I work out has to change. A man who picks up weights at 18 years old is going to put on weight a lot fucking faster than a man who's 38 years old. That's just how it fucking goes. Well, naturally, of course, for all you boys juicing out there, getting that T game up. But with that, you have to understand that whatever's going to happen or whatever goal you're going to, that it has to change with you. I think people will sometimes romanticize almost depression or being stuck, and that ends up being this thing that they keep taking in and being like, oh yeah, it just didn't work out, I feel so bad. They have this tragedy, whether or not they realize they're carrying it. It could just be the tragedy of bad luck, the tragedy of that one breakup, the tragedy of that one thing, and oh, my car didn't start and I couldn't go to the gym, so I guess I just wasn't meant to. It's like, no, that's where you need to just make the thing happen, and no one's gonna fucking do that for you.
So along those lines, I'll paraphrase. I don't remember if it's probably from both, but Sayok and Atienza Kali. But to paraphrase, there are no victims, only volunteers. And I'll caveat, like, you could be a child and absolutely be a victim. But when you're an adult, like, hey, I went to the gas station, I got robbed. Like, I'm a victim. Were you? Like, you went to the gas station. Like, everything's on the table. You know that can happen. It happens to people all the time. So did you prepare yourself for that with, one, familiarization with like violence? Do you carry tools, like all these other things? Or like, no, did you just volunteer for that situation you put yourself in? And I mean, it's like full ownership with, what you do and how you carry yourself. Like, no, like outside of a kid, like, no victims, only volunteers. And I mean, I know that'll rub people the wrong way. Like, hey, I was assaulted or this. And it's like, okay, maybe, like, what have you done in your life to prepare yourself for a very real possibility that like everyone is aware of? Like, fill in the blank as far as whatever type of assault you want to talk about. And the answer is usually like, oh, well, I didn't really do anything. I'm like, okay.
I fully agree with that. That's something where, like, I hate the phrase when someone says, you see someone in a shitty relationship and like, oh, you deserve so much better. And it took me a while for me to realize, and I'm glad that I did. I was in a really shitty relationship for nearly 9 years of my life, from the ages of 17 to 20, 25. And I was with someone who just like, they were really abusive, and there were other people who saw that, you know, and like abuse takes many forms, but it was just like there were people who'd be like, hey, you know, he's the kind of guy that would cheat on you or do whatever. And there were people who tried to warn me, and you could not fucking tell me. I mistook endurance for loyalty and was just like, no, fuck that. You don't know this person. Like, I would get in arguments with people and like cut people out of my life who like talked about him that way and all this stuff. And it became, I had to realize, like, when I was finally cheated on, like, that was the one thing I said I wouldn't put up with. I say finally, it probably happened more than that. But it was like, when that came to the culmination of everything and I faced that, I realized, no, I did deserve this person because no one could fucking talk me out of it. I woke up every single day and white knuckle gripped an idea of someone that I had. And I held on to that and I put up with all the bullshit. And it's like, you can look from the outside and be like, oh, that's fucked up. And I can look at that and be like, yeah, you know, that was fucked up. And what's even more fucked up is I chose to do that every day. I picked that person every day. And yes, abuse fucks with your mind. You know, so many of us come from fucking childhood trauma, like shitty stuff that's happened. We often get into relationships that emulate either the exact opposite or the exact thing that we came from. We stick to the demons we know. These things happen. These are patterns. But coming to that realization and accepting accountability for the fact that, no, I picked this person. And you know what? I'm never going to do that again. And you know what? It's not the next person's fault that this person did these things to me. Instead of this message that, oh, you can't rely on a man these days, like, oh, how about we find a way to pick out a man that is reliable, pick out a man that is good. What does that look like? Who am I? What do I bring to the table, right? And that transformed it for me of just being like, wow, I fucking hate that now. When someone's like, oh, they don't deserve them, I'm like, they pick that bitch every day. Yes, they do.
Yeah, no, like at the end of the day, if one, you can't make good choices for people. Like, no, period.
Fuck, you can't.
And I mean,
so
you shouldn't. You shouldn't
so
either.
Because sorry,
like,
I just got.
Yeah, no, you can't make good choices. But the other part of that is you shouldn't either. Like, people have to be able to grow through that. But then the growth part is wildly uncomfortable. I can tell you from personal experience when you start to own all that stuff, because it's, yeah, like it's really, really raw and uncomfortable. But if you do, it's incredibly liberating because no, you don't lay your problems at anyone's feet. You're just like, oh, okay. And so even if, hey, someone did this to you or someone did something to me, like, okay, like noted, the game changed and now it is my turn. So how do I want to respond to that? Like, rather than like, oh, like I'm a victim, like, oh, cool. Like, situation change, like how do I get to like make my move now? And not in like a combative way. I mean, it could be in a combative way, but right. Just as a frame of mind where it's like, oh, cool, challenge accepted, like let's do this thing, rather than like, oh my gosh, like look at what happened to me, like this person did, like, okay, like so you're a victim now, like that's cool, like do you want a cake? I don't know.
To that note though, I will say I think it's healthy for people to take a moment, and it's okay to be bummed out. It's okay to be pissed. Sure. It's okay to be like, no, fuck that person. They wronged me. I had this. Be sad about it. Be upset about it. But just know that it's also okay to get over it. Like there's a stubbornness sometimes in like holding on to our traumas or like hurt, where we want to hold on to that thing and not let it go because we identify with it. And something that I've had to learn that was really difficult, and something that I pass on to my younger cousins and younger brother, I say all the time, know how to be wrong. Like
not easy.
People get so wrapped up in their identity politics, identity, you know, culture, whatever that is. And there comes a point where I get excited when I have a fruitful debate with someone and I realize something. I rely on my friends and the people I trust to tell me if I'm fucking up. And I'm very clear about that. Like I'll ask people, hey, like, what is it? Can I do this? So everyone will say, oh, I love this person, but. And I'm like, no, what's that but? Let's talk about it. Is it something I can fix? It doesn't mean I'll always change my behavior. Back in the day, it'd be like, I'd hear someone didn't like me or get like it's the equivalent of someone getting a random comment and then changing their whole business structure on it, being like, oh, well, this one person made this comment about this one. And you're like, shut the fuck up. You have 50,000 likes on the post and they're like, your knees look weird. Like, calm down, So with that, trying to find that middle ground of being like, okay, well, I don't necessarily need somebody to constantly tell me I'm doing well or doing better or like, patting me on the back. I need people in my life and require those friends to be like, hey, you're being a cunt about this. And I'm like, oh shit, am I? I'm sorry. Like, I'm genuinely sorry. Let me fix this. And I'm not going to adjust for people because if you're doing something right, someone's always going to hate you. We're always going to be the villain in someone else's story, period. Whoever you are, like whatever you've been through, someone's going to like your ex. And someone's talking shit about you, and there are people who still like you anyway, too.
No, like 100%. Like, I agree. And yeah, to the end of like, yeah, sometimes it is hard to pass through things, like to work through things. And there's something to be said for like legitimately a good night's sleep, regardless of like how terrible things feel. Like in the middle of the night, you're like, man, I'm going to go to bed. And then you wake up the next day, you're like, oh, holy shit, like the sun just came up. Like, I guess the world's still spinning. Like, okay, we can get through this. And yeah, give yourself some perspective.
That next right thing is so hard. I recently dealt with another like loss that was close to me. My brother had this Hallmark romance with this gal. Like he rides his motorcycle and stuff around. She met him and they hung out and she like approached him and was like, hey, I think you're cool. Like, and like made that interaction and then they hit it off. We're talking, this was some movie bullshit. Like she had the sweetest laugh, the cutest fucking girl. She comes over, stays the night for the first time and they hang out and it's all good and he drops her off so he can go to work and then never sees her again. She got fucking hit by a car and died that day. And it was like, oof. Yeah. And nothing's harder. Like I lost a brother to cancer. My brother and I both lost a brother to cancer. He was a year younger than me. But it's like going through that, I'm very good at dealing with my own grief at this point. For better or worse, I've had a lot of experience with it. And I feel like I find healthy means to do that. But nothing was harder than watching my brother hurt like that because big sister couldn't make it better. And people will sometimes minimize, the suffering of others that way. Like in that moment, like, yeah, my brother's absolutely the victim of some really terrible fucking circumstance. Like that sucks. But it's like in that moment, realizing that all you can do is like, I've been through loss, I've been through those things, but people will minimize that and go, oh, well, it's just this, or you didn't know each other very long, or, whatever. And it's like, no, when you have the experience in that position, you just be there for that person and tell them, hey, I know. It's so fucked up, I know. Sometimes you just need someone to be pissed with you, or you need someone to be sad with you. You don't need someone to blow sunshine up your ass. So it's like it goes both ways. Just to your note of like, oh, we get up, the world keeps spinning. There comes a point where there's a solace in that of knowing I made it another day. But there's also sometimes people where they push through that so much that they forget, to your point of talking about experiences, right? They want to be able to just say they got through it instead of experiencing getting through it and then having.
Sometimes you just got to sit in it, man. Like,
fuck.
There's no fast way through that.
No, you just got to fucking hurt. So, it's okay, guys out there listening, it's all right. You have a sad day. And you know that it's okay to have a sad day. Because sometimes the answer to a bad day is just having a bad fucking day. It's not, oh, let's go do this or it's all better. And, hey, it's okay. Like, I don't need light at the end of the tunnel right now. I need you to tell me that that's fucked up and that you're here for me.
And then you will be armed with perspective, which will make you appreciate all of the days that are better than that one.
Someone said recently, to me, again, it's just a reminder. They're just like, hey, when things are going bad, it means that things are going good because there has to be something there. And it's a little tough facing that.
It's uncomfortable, but yeah, no, you have to have that perspective. I mean, yeah, you can eat like amazing steak all day, every day. And then you're like, man, sure would like a hot dog. I mean, no, but I mean, it's change, like change in any form. Like it's that change that creates perspective to where you're like, oh man, and then eat a couple of hot dogs and you're like, damn, I would really like that ribeye back.
On that note, what was the change for you? When you said you made the decision to be like, I'm done with contracting, I want to do these things and be there with my sons, what was that moment for you?
So I mean, ultimately, like having one, if anyone out there has ever been divorced or is going through a divorce, they will have been there. But divorce is terrible, especially with kids. I'm not saying that you can't have an amicable divorce. Like maybe it probably is more difficult to have an amicable divorce with kids.
We got there.
But yeah, no. And so all of a sudden, getting your world kind of like torn apart and recognizing you don't maybe have say in everything in your life, to include like time with your kids and stuff like that. To just be aware that like, oh yeah, like this court can say something and that is going to determine when you and how you can like see your children, for example, which is like horrifying, like super messed up. And I ultimately ended up coming to the realization that like, hey, like kind of the most important thing for me right now is to like be with my boys and be a present father. And with that, I was like, what does that look like? Like being a father and being present, like, well, okay, I need to be there. And the easy answer was, hey, so we ended up going through terrible court, divorce, all that stuff. And we were court appointing mediation for like child custody, my wife and I. And I really I'd come to the realization that like, hey, I want my boys in my life. And like that's something that I need to and do and should value. And so, hey, I really want 50-50 physical legal custody. And my wife was like, no, like, absolutely not. And I was like, look, like, here's what I want. And the way I was fully ready to just continue contracting for probably the rest of my life because it was easy and I made a bunch of money and basically work 60 on, 60 off. And so like, hey, I'm going to be gone for 2 months. When I come back, like I want my boys for 2 months. And like not uninterrupted, like I understand the disruption there for them, but like I want time with them so they can go back to you for like weekends, like here and there through that, all that stuff, like no problem. But like I want basically my boys for the lion's share of that time when I'm home. And she would not agree to 50-50. And so finally, like through the mediator, the woman was like, okay, well, what about 50-50 when you are present like in the county? So being gone half the year working overseas, it turns into 25-75 timeshare. So when I'm home, I basically would have my boys like every other week. And so what I really and truly wanted was my boys. Like I wanted time with my boys. So I was like, okay, cool. Like, let's just go ahead and get this signed and through the court so we can be done. So as soon as that stuff came back from the court, all the documents signed, I was like, by the way, I'm never going back overseas. So we have 50-50 physical legal custody. Like, totally without a plan, like, which is why I, scraped by for years, like, exiting without a plan in debt. But yeah, like that's what was important.
It's crazy too how I'll talk to people who've worked jobs where they had a lot of income, like came from a lot or whatever, and then something changes and there wasn't really a foresight to that. Like there's such a comfort in that money when you make that much of just like, oh, everything's going to be fine. I'm just going to have it. And then it's not there. And then there's a huge other dose of the real world that comes with that of like, oh, I'm like a plebe and I have to do bottom of the barrel work for bottom of the barrel pay. This is fucking shitty.
Yeah, no, like it is a massive reality check. And it's also one of those things too, like, bam, immediately, like, all my credit shot, everything like that. Like, I have just had a debit card for like years. And so if there's no money for that, then you're not getting that. That's how that works.
Right.
And I mean, you end up getting to be really good at being poor, which honestly is a really good skill. And it's one of those where it's interesting though, because like basically zeroing everything out and like slowly like getting feet back under you. But it makes you like re-examine like, hey, like what's important? Like, is this thing important for me to get right now? Or like, what is a good use of my money, which is a direct correlation to my time? And then also the importance of, because again, people are like, oh, I'm super good with money, I should go contract. I won't fall into the trap you did. Okay, that's cool.
Okay.
And really what ends up happening for almost everyone, and you could probably speak to this to the people that you know that have contracted, is your lifestyle immediately scales with your income. And I mean, honestly, that happens for most people across the board, even outside of contracting. You're like, oh, I'm making more money. Like, I can do this now. And you're like, oh, or not. Like, or you could just maintain like a realistic lifestyle and maybe save a little bit, or not be like leveraged to the hilt in debt. And so, yeah,
Not
I
go
mean,
off
as
base and get a car with like 900% interest.
exactly, predatory lending practices. And no, like all that's like, it's real though. Like people or people just very easily and unbeknownst to them, like scale their lifestyle with their income. And so that's one, I mean, I don't make a lot of money, like at all. My bills are paid and I'm stoked on that. But like, I've also, going back to like identity and stuff like that, like I drive a $500 minivan. Like it's like rusted out and it's beat up. Like I blasted the oil pan out, like off-roading, and I had to replace the oil pan. Like, and I will drive it until it dies. Like, I don't care. Like, my self-worth is not tied up in the vehicle that I drive. And that unto itself is a journey that especially men like just have to go on in their own time. As far as, yeah, there was a time when I identified as like, I'm a Marine. All right, cool. I'm a police officer. I'm a contractor. Like all that stupid shit. And then eventually it's like, oh no, like I'm Ivan and I'm also a father of two boys. Like that's probably the apex of the importance of my life at this juncture right now. But I'm just me and I'm a father. So there's that. Rather than, hey, like I need to be this thing and I need all of the things that go with it because that is what my identity is wrapped up in and stuff like that.
God, that's so real. Someone once told me, and this stuck with me. They're like, you always know who's rich because they'll show you. But those who are wealthy, you discover. And that's something where I had noticed that when, you know, I've met some people in my life and you can just tell they have like a pair of leather shoes that's worn, but they spent $300 on that pair of leather shoes and they've had them for 11 years. They have a truck that they've maintained and kept going for the last 20 years. You know, so you see these things and like there's different kinds of wealth. There's the earned wealth and then there's the wealth that's kind of given. And I feel like there's a big difference there. And to your note of just, you know, being poor is a skill, that is such an underrated thing to say because it is. So like growing up, like I didn't grow up in fucking a mansion. Like we didn't go without in the way that, you know, we weren't like destitute, like not able to pay power bills month on end, whatever. Like we lived in a home. The home was always a fixer-upper. You know, I didn't get, whatever, drywall in certain spots didn't happen until like I was a teenager. Like what? But I didn't give a fuck as a kid. That being said, Like, I learned a lot of shit. I grew up doing contracting, grew up doing those things. And now it's like I've been able to lay my own floors, build my own dojo, do my own shit, look at my own vehicle. I know how to assess my vehicle and know what's wrong with it enough. Like, I'm not a mechanic, but I know enough. And growing up not going to the fucking doctor has made me very useful. I'm my own backyard medic. I've done a lot of YouTube tutorials and figuring out, and there's not a lot you can't get done with super glue, some kind of like medical antiseptic, and fucking, like duct tape. Like, those three things can get you so far, So there's.
They can also do a lot of things in a vehicle with those. Those same materials. Yeah. You can fix a lot of vehicle stuff.
Oh man, super glue and duct tape is my first aid kit. Like, for the most part. I mean, we do need some trauma packings and whatever, but it's like the amount of times that I've needed stitches and I'm like, nah, super glue and duct tape. We're good to go. And
I was driving home from base and had a radiator hose blow out and went into the little whatever store attached to a gas station. And basically got a thing of super glue, some duct tape, and then just more water for the radiator. Glued it, taped it, poured water in, and drove home. And drove on it for another 3 or 4 days before I replaced it.
Well, it's like on the note of usefulness, of poorness being a skill. It's funny when I meet these people, especially people like only children who grew up with a single parent who does everything for them, or they had money. They're borderline helpless in situations. I remember just on the note of my ex not knowing how to use the washing machine. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? You're a grown man. What the fuck? And there's people like that who they can't even, they don't know how to change a light bulb. And I know that sounds fucking retarded because it is, but that happens. Or they're like, oh no, labor's for poor people. We don't do these things.
Yeah, no, people have been enabled because there's never been a consequence. I will do that for you. And now you don't have to do that. And I mean, it's so with having kids, do you know what is a huge pain in the ass is having your kids make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich the first or even the 20th time. You're just give me the damn knife. I got this. Give it to me. But, do you want to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for a 30-year-old child? The answer is no. So you invest the time and you take a deep breath and use a little bit of patience, and you go through all of those simple things so you don't have to have an adult who can't make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or know how to use the washer or change a light bulb.
Or clean up their space. Parents,
all of it.
Moms who clean up. And that theme carries over, not just in parental ways, but in a business aspect too. You see it so much. I hope businesses kind of unfuck themselves sometimes. They'll be like, hey, help us isolate issues to figure out where this miscommunication is happening or whatever. And you plug in a system. And oftentimes the system is you have a helicopter parent running the place who isn't able to take a step back and let the machine work on its own. And when they hold everyone's hand, it's like having, that one middle-aged lady in HR who wants to make sure that her job is invaluable, so she gatekeeps a bunch of information. And then when something happens, I'm the only one who knows how to do this. You're like, no, that's not helping anybody. You become better when the person behind it, the responsible party, or the authoritative party is the one who's able to delegate and let people grow in those spaces, because everything's a shit peanut butter and jelly sandwich until it isn't. And that's really hard for people to watch, especially in a workplace when they're like, oh God, this isn't gonna work or whatever. It's no, you gotta let them, it's okay, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna work its way out.
No, it takes time and patience, but people have to have the ability to do it and fail and learn and get better and finally, master it.
Failure is the root of all successes. I'm not going to pretend that I'm everywhere I want to be in my life, but I stand by that. People will...
Oh, no. People are afraid of failure to the point where they won't try anything. And you're like, you failed way worse than if you tried and failed.
Failure is totally just pivot points. Everything, failure is not Like failure is obstacles. It's not in its totality. So like goals are organic, failure is organic, success is organic. What used to work won't work anymore, like what you're talking about with fitness, right? So these things all change. And if we can look at failure as something that is an organic thing that happens, we maneuver with it. Like success isn't, oh cool, I just got lucky and got this shit today. It's like, no, like it's not. You have to do a bunch of shit that doesn't fucking work. Have hard conversations, and going back to accountability, know how to be wrong and reflect and correct on your fucking behavior. Because you can reflect all day and be like, yeah, you know, I'm an asshole. And if you never do anything to change that, then what the fuck? Like, then you're just an asshole and you're fully aware of that. Like, you're just a piece of shit.
Which is the worst kind.
Yeah, people are like, oh yeah, you know, I'm just fucking retarded. I can't. And it's like, okay, so you're not gonna try? Like there comes a point where you have to fucking try, or you are going to fail every relationship. And these are the kinds of people who walk through the world. I'm not wrong. The world is. And you're like, you need to chill the fuck out. If this is resonating with you right now and you're that person who can't take criticism, learn how to fucking take criticism and actually maybe change a little bit. Like there's so much to that. Even, you know, I'm a mouthy cunt. Anyone listening knows that. You know, I've got, you know, my personality, and it's like, if my dumb ass can sit down and still have someone tell me like, hey, I don't like this needs to be addressed, I'll be like, oh shit. Like what used to really hurt my feelings, like you can still be like, oh, it doesn't feel good, but you can still work through that and find a better solution.
Not if you're a narcissist.
Oh yeah, no, that's
Then it will just literally break you.
The other N-word. Yes.
They are the way they are.
No, God, that's the fucking truth. Okay, well, on that note, Ivan, this has been a really cool and thought-provoking episode. I'm just gonna, again, I know you mentioned your stuff and whatnot. Where can people find you? How can they access your page, social medias, whatever?
Yeah, no. Real quick, one last thing. First of all, this conversation went wildly in a different direction than I'd originally envisioned, but it's been cool. But since something you brought, well, something we've talked about, just like being a father and stuff like that too, and has come up, and it's something that I actually get like DMs about too, is people, because like on my Instagram and stuff, which is Kit_Badger on Instagram, there'll be stuff like with my boys and go out and do stuff, like live life, share experiences, and people, like common theme will be like, hey man, like how do you find time to, like, how are you able to go do this stuff like with your kids? And the not fun answer is like willingness to be uncomfortable, like for long periods of time, like whether it's being good at being poor or just recognizing like, hey, I'm not going to get a new this because that doesn't improve my life over going and spending time like with my boys doing something meaningful. And so there's no free lunch with it. But if you're willing to do something and actually willing to sacrifice things that don't matter for things that do matter, like, yeah, you can absolutely make it happen. But yeah, be in for discomfort and be cool with it, because getting the things you want don't usually get handed to you. But sorry,
no,
that last little bit.
You know, for what it's worth, we usually polish things off with dad advice. And to be fair, this whole episode has kind of been like, you know, dad advice. So that just buttons up everything real nicely.
There we go.
But no, it's been really awesome having you on. And I know Nathan and BR and Lucas, they're all busy right now. Like I said, Nathan and BR were headed to Carolinas to do a meet and greet, I think, with AWS. I know Nathan was excited to chat with you too at some point, because I think he mentioned that he knows you as well. So at some point we'll have to have you back on. You know,
that'd be fun.
Stuff. But no, it was really awesome. So one last chance, sounds like Kit_Badger for Instagram, and
and the website is just kitbadger.com, and the YouTube channel is Kit Badger.
All right, all y'all. Hey, thanks for hanging out and listening to us, and hopefully you walk out with some little golden nuggets to make your life better. So get up, make your bed, you know, wash your ass, do that.